All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We have a great guest on this week, Javier David, or is it Javier David?
The former.
Former. Awesome.
Javier David is the appropriate way, but I'm not fussy necessarily. So
okay. Well, Javier David. Well, all right. Let's give everyone a few minutes to sign on, see where everyone's signing on from. I'm here in Jaffa, Israel. Javier is down in my beautiful Miami, Florida. Let's see where everyone's calling in from as they start to roll in. All right, LA, Phoenix. Baltimore, UK, hello. South Africa, more Miami, Mexico, amazing. Minnesota. All right, well, while we're waiting for more people to log in, we're actually going to be starting a poll, just a really quick poll. Now, of course, we're going to be talking to Javier David. He is the managing editor of Markets and Business for Axios. And we'll talk a little bit more about him in a second. But I wanted to know, well, both of us wanted to know, how many of you guys have any experience working in journalism? So we'll give everyone a few minutes to answer that question there. All right, yeah, so the poll, the questions are coming in, the answers are coming in. So while we're waiting, I know that we're getting ready for a great holiday season out here in Israel. We have the big three religions out here. We have, Hanukkah coming up next week. We have Christmas coming up at the same time. What's just a fun fact about celebrating here is that we do Orthodox and Protestant Christian and Catholic Christmas out here. It's a beautiful time, a lot of fireworks and a lot of celebrations, and hopefully you guys can all come visit one day. Okay, so we have some people that were former journalists. Amazing. All right, so I'm just going to end the poll. All right, now, as we can see, about 53% of the respondents of the people here don't have any journalism experience. The other 37%, yes, they do. And another 9%, they kind of sort of do. We have, as I believe I read some journalism professors. I think this is great. I'm really excited to speak to Javier about, what is journalism, what are the different positions, how do the journalists work together, what's really going on behind the scenes of a newsroom when we're pitching. So I'm just going to really quickly just get into it. Again, for those who just joined, welcome, thanks for being here, and let's get into the mind of a journalist and editor. So first of all, I just wanted to give a quick, explanation of who we are. Just a quick background. So my name is Eitan Goldstein. I'm the communications manager for Propel. I use the platform every day to get earned media coverage for the company. Before this, I worked at GKPR, which is one of the premier PR tech firms in Israel. And I represented companies from seed stage to Fortune 100. Before this, I myself was a senior editor at Ynet News, which is the English language edition of Israel's largest newspaper. And I'm extraordinarily excited to introduce you all our guest who's joining today. Again, Javier David. Javier is, as mentioned previously, is the managing editor of business and markets at Axios. He's a seasoned journalist and editor with nearly 25 years of experience. Now, he oversees all of Axios's business coverage and business newsletters, and just a couple weeks ago was tapped to be a CBS News streaming contributor, where he'll cover business, markets, and the economy. Before this, he was an editor at Yahoo Finance, where he covered foreign exchange, capital markets, the global economy, technology, corporate governance, politics, and policy. And before this, he was a senior editor at CNBC, as well as the weekend homepage editor for CNBC.com. He was a contributor for The Grio, a Wall Street Journal financial reporter, and a financial reporter for Reuters. He was also a senior media relations specialist for an investor relations firm and worked in crisis management and strategic relations. So he knows also our side of the coin and where we're coming from. Javier, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Thank you. So just a quick agenda, what we're going to be talking about. First, we're going to do the introductions, a quick background of Propel, and talk a little bit more about Axios. Then we're going to get into the meat of it, the journalism hierarchy, who is who in journalism, and who is who in the editorial field as well. After that, we're going to talk about the life of a pitch in a reporter's inbox. And then talk about something that's been asked about a lot on the on various webinars, following up how much is too much. And then finally, we're going to end it with changes in the media landscape today that we're seeing, and then follow that with a question and answer. So first of all, we're going to just do a little bit of self-promotion here. Just a little bit about us, who is Propel? We're the first PR tool built by PR people for PR people. And our CEO, Zach Cutler, founded it in 2019 after running his own agency for 9 years. In his agency years, Zach was always on the lookout for better technology to manage all of his agency's campaigns, journalist relationship, and team productivity and business outcomes. Finding none that suited his needs, he decided to build the first CRM, especially for PR on the market. So he sold his agency and built out Propel. We're now on a mission to democratize and make PR and make PR technology accessible to the masses. We support leading brands and agencies like Real Chemistry, Microsoft, and NPR by reimagining earned media. We've launched many first-of-a-kind features for PR workflows, including insights and analytics tools, and the industry's only native Gmail and Outlook email pitch plugins. Javier, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing, Axios, and being a CBS contributor?
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered all of the bases at the top of the conversation, so thank you for that. But as you imagine, Axios, we've transitioned. When Axios was first founded about 5 or so years ago, we were primarily newsletters, primarily politics. But if you've been paying attention, you've noticed that the brand itself has grown. Our newsroom has absolutely exploded. We are on a growth path. We're doing more local news. We're doing more national news. One of the reasons why I was fortunate enough to be hired is because we have expanded our business coverage with a team of really stellar reporters, all very experienced, all very knowledgeable, all receiving pitches from folks like you on a daily basis. So one of the reasons why I agreed to talk today to you guys today is because I deal a lot with PR folks. I am of the belief that a good story can be found just about anywhere. I do believe that it's worthwhile to maintain good working relationships with PR professionals. Some journalists differ in that assessment, but I think that to the extent that PR people can get a little bit more savvy about how to get a journalist's attention, what to do and certainly what not to do, I think it'll be mutually beneficial. A good journalist wants a good story. A good journalist wants to talk to interesting people. A good journalist wants to get a great idea that nobody else is covering. On the flip side of the coin, you as PR professionals have obligations to your clients. You want to sell your story. You want to, get in front of the right people. In a lot of ways, I think every client, and again, as Eitan mentioned, I did this for a while myself. So every client has this expectation, reasonable or not, they should be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and leading the business section of the New York Times or what have you. And there's a managing of expectations that has to go on. So I think that hopefully when this session is over, you have a little bit of a better sense as to, how to manage that relationship with the folks that you're working with, and also the best way or the best practices to approach any journalist in any newsroom, and just being a little bit realistic about kind of how these things get covered, and a journalist's willingness, given that we're all being pulled in multiple directions on a daily basis. And this week has been completely chaotic with, the FTX Sam Bankman-Fried story, and like shoes keep dropping and you have to jump and drop what you're doing. And so I think a big part of it is paying attention to the ebbs and flows of the news cycle. Don't pitch a reporter who's covering SBF, FTX with either some frivolous story or something that's completely unrelated to their beat. I think that just kind of paying attention to what is happening in the news cycle is critical for PR professionals who kind of want to get this right.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, you hit on something there. Not only look at what is the journalist beat, but understand where they are. Where are they in the hierarchy? How much power do they have? And what is their actual responsibility? Something that I would see when I was a senior editor is, of course, people are going to be pitching me stories, but then I'd have someone who's quite low down on the news desk getting pitched the same story after perhaps I didn't respond to them. And so, I think that, is a good transition into, what does the journalism hierarchy look like? There's so many different titles. There's so many different types of managers and journalists, whatever. Can you please give us an overview of the different positions and the different roles and responsibilities each person has in a newsroom? What is the difference between a deputy reporter and senior reporter, for instance?
Right. So, I mean, the hierarchy itself, the titles differ from newsroom to newsroom. But the hierarchy is sort of editor, reporter, and within the editor and even in between them is like copy editor, someone new down. When I first started in this business, a junior reporter was considered a news assistant or a news associate. And then, hopefully at some point down the road got promoted to journalist or reporter. And at Reuters, we use journalist and correspondent. And in some newsrooms, there's like chief correspondent or senior reporter or senior correspondent. I wouldn't pay a whole lot of attention to that because I'm a managing editor. And in theory, or at least from an org chart perspective, I have a lot of sort of dotted lines and direct reports, et cetera. So I oversee all of this coverage of a team of like at least 12 to 15 people, but I write a lot. So one of the things that I think, Eitan, you and I discussed this is, I think it's really critical for the PR representative to not necessarily pay attention to reporter, senior reporter, et cetera, et cetera. Do the homework in terms of kind of like identifying whether this reporter is someone who has written about this particular subject for an extended period of time. I'd say at least 5 to 6 months, because some reporters go on vacation and someone else kind of like slots in for them and covers their beat for a while. So if you're a reporter who kind of like covered for Joe Schmo, who went away on parental leave for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or whatever, that's probably not the best person for you to reach out to with a specific pitch that would really be best directed to Joe Schmo. Jane came in and did his job for a couple of months, but she's not necessarily the beat reporter or has the sort of expansive amount of experience covering that particular subject. So my advice, honestly, is don't necessarily pay a whole lot of attention, because as an editor, I can assign stories, but I can also write them myself if I feel like, okay, this is something I'm either working on or I'm really super duper passionate about. But what I would suggest is, again, is just don't necessarily pay a whole lot of attention to someone calling themselves reporter or senior reporter. Just really do your best to ascertain whether or not that person is in fact covering the beat you need them to cover.
Right. No, I think, I 100% agree. And, you're working at Axios, which is a huge news organization comparatively. Where I was, we had maybe, 4 or 5 people underneath me. And as you said, I think you said 12, 15, something like that.
Yeah, on this team, yeah.
Yeah, on your team alone. So, I think also, we have to look when you're pitching a publication, how big is the publication? How many people are there? People are going to be wearing different hats, at a smaller publication versus a larger one where they might be able to really become a niche reporter. And I think that might, that's where things might get a little bit hazy, especially in the smaller industry publications. What do you think about that? Just because there's fewer.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that, that it's always kind of a shiny ball, I think, for PR folks to chase the person or the publication that has a wide reach. You want, in theory, it makes perfect sense. Like, you want to get the Wall Street Journal, you want to get the New York Times, you want to get the Washington Post if you can, but there's at least a dollop of realism that you have to sort of maintain when you're pitching this. Is like, is this going to realistically land in this particular publication with this particular journalist? And that it may be better served for, like, back in the day, we used to do a lot of work with trade publications who are very niche, and tend to focus a lot on specific industries and like the nitty gritty, and getting in the weeds, and say like corporate governance or institutional investing or pension investments, etc. But you, on the one hand, shoot for the stars. I'm not going to tell anybody, like, don't pitch the Wall Street Journal. You should, and everybody wants to be in the Wall Street Journal for sure. But also, pay attention to whether or not that individual or that particular publication does the sort of coverage that you want. Are they amenable to covering smaller indices? Because that's kind of the challenge, I think, with lesser known people. There's a whole idea of, in my business and in the business of, in like business journalism, we tend to, and it's a double-edged sword, admittedly. But if there's a big name involved, we're much more apt, or much more likely to cover that story than we would if it's some newfangled thing that nobody ever knew about. Now, to be fair, once upon a time, Amazon was a newfangled thing that nobody ever heard of. Once upon a time, Facebook was a newfangled thing no one ever heard of. So everyone wants to break in, and everyone wants to believe that they're the next Amazon, Facebook, Uber, what have you. But like, that's why I said, you've got to maintain a little bit of realism. Is this realistically something, like, in my business, it would be about who's involved, also whether or not they've been able to earn or like raise a lot of money. Who are the investors involved there? Is it something really, really unique and new to the sector? Is it going to revolutionize something? There's always an interesting story to tell, but it's just the challenge, I think, is trying to find the appropriate place to tell that particular story, and whether they're going to be receptive to the pitch.
Right, exactly. For instance, a 15 million Series A round might not break Axios, but it might get another publication who would be more in tune with that particular industry. Something
right.
Like that.
And sometimes, and good for bringing that up, because one of the newsletters that folds up under me is Parada, and Parada does a lot of blurbs. So a blurb would not necessarily be, so-and-so CEO of this great startup, etc., raised a bunch of money, and he comes from this world, and he went to that school or whatever. But a blurb would literally be, this company raised some X amount of dollars through, these Sequoia or some of the bigger names in the industry, whomever it is. But the blurb, sometimes you kind of have to be content with getting a mention as opposed to a full-fledged story. And as a reporter, there are a number of stories where I've assigned and I've written that are kind of roundups of like a big industry trend, but I'll quote your guy, or I'll quote the company, or I'll cite them as an example. And that in and of itself, take the victory where you can get it. And that's a victory.
Exactly. I 100% agree with you. Like, even in my time as a PR person, when we were able to get a small seed series CEO sandwiched in one of these newsletters between one of the VPs of Amazon and another one of Google, we've got to learn how to take these as a win as well, and explain to the clients, hey, this is a huge deal. It's incredible you got in here anyway.
Right.
So,
and Dan Primack, who runs Parada, like, he's a genius at kind of aggregating all of these blurbs, and he's very adamant and punctilious about citing everyone involved in any particular series of raising money, because his belief is, if these guys, they're small now, but if they get big, they'll remember that you didn't cite them or you ignored them or what have you. So there's a penalty to be paid for a journalist who sort of poo-poos something that might actually turn out to be the next big thing. So I think the challenge is kind of identifying, like, is this the next big thing, and be realistic. Don't like oversell it, but tease out the most interesting bits that you possibly can to attract attention. And just again, like, and I cannot stress this enough, target the right person.
Oh, 100%. I'm gonna actually get back into I want to come back to a little bit later to what you just said about making sure that what you say is accurate, but teasing it out a little bit later. But one of the things that is really confusing to a lot of us in PR is the way that journalists on their end work together and how the editors and the journalists work together. What does that workflow look like? Or for instance, a corollary to that question is, sometimes we'll send a pitch to reporter X, and then that reporter X won't respond. We'll send it to reporter Y, and reporter Y says, "Oh, this is perfect for X. Let me bring in X to this email chain." So, what's going on up there? What's happening behind the scenes that we're not seeing from our end?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is journalists are overwhelmed by pitches. And I have I aggressively zero inboxing. So I'm usually, when I'm scanning, like, this is for me, this is not for me. I look at the headline. I kind of like, if I click in, it should be brief. Don't feel compelled to explain a lot. But I do think that the biggest barrier to getting noticed is just the sheer volume of inbox nuttery that we get on any particular basis, especially on a daily. So I think I shared this point with Eitan, but I have kind of like a policy in which I'll put a pitch in 3 different buckets, and I even have sort of subdivisions or subfolders in my inbox so that I can like file them away appropriately. The first is like, okay, I'm working on this today. This is a perfect fit for what I'm working on. I will like immediately respond. The second bucket is, this is interesting, but I really don't have any bandwidth to cover this today or this week or maybe even this month. And I make a good faith effort to respond to say, this is interesting, but like, I just don't have the time to look at this. Let's circle back or revisit this at some point next week or like after the holidays, etc. And the third is like, this is absolutely ridiculous. I will never write about it. I don't understand why this person even pitched me. It's going in the trash. I'm not responding. And if that individual had done any homework, they would have known that I was not the right person to pitch.
Straight into getting blocked, it sounds
like. Exactly.
Yeah. So okay. So there's another question that I have. I remember remembering from my days as a senior editor, a lot of where and again, just for clarification, I did mainly breaking news or just general assignment news. So beyond the Israeli reporters that were here, we would also get a lot from Reuters, AFP, AP. I mean, there's a little RSS feed that's constantly updating, and we're constantly getting stories from that. So, I mean, I remember that PR, my friends in PR when I was a journalist were like, how are we possibly able to compete with this? So is that still the case today? If so, like, what do you see as a good balance for, PR people to take into consideration, knowing that they're up against this constantly streaming RSS feed?
Yeah, it's not really I think I don't
maybe
have
not RSS, but
yeah. But I do believe that there, the pitching has gotten a lot more sophisticated. And one of the services that I use is called Quoted, which is sometimes basically like, I'm looking for some really obscure source to talk about something, or someone, I want an anecdotal sort of perspective. So I'll send up a flag like, hey, do you have anybody? It's basically a service where they send out a pitch from a reporter to a bunch of different people, PR folks, representatives, etc., saying, I am looking for a subject matter expert in, say, the Malaysian ringgit, which is the currency of Malaysia. It's but it's something that someone doesn't write on every day. I just don't know, like, who would I get in touch with? So that is useful to me as a journalist. And I think it crystallizes this idea that you should see yourself as being a potential resource to a reporter. Don't just like kind of like someone who pitches them, I really need you to write about this, or like I really need, some sort of a hit to take back to my client, whatever. Like try and position yourself as best as you can as a resource. Like it's a recurring, if you're lucky, it's a recurring relationship. The journalists, will maybe if you're lucky, they take your pitch, and you hit a home run, and in the future, like how do I best help you report what you do? I don't, try not to strike the right balance between being assertive, but don't be a nuisance. Like don't constantly like badger, etc. You should very much try and maintain the relationship. I mean, journalists are very responsive to things that involve free drinks or free lunches or coffees.
As long as it doesn't break ethics rules, then it's
Yes, as long as it
okay.
doesn't break ethics rules. No Rolexes, no sort of rentals in the Caribbean, etc. But also kind of think of it as relationship building. Like if you can offer them off the record with a top executive, then do that. We love off the record sessions. We love to kind of like cultivate relationships with well-placed people. And it may not be that meeting or the initial meeting turns into something, but it may lead to something down the road. So it's always sort of keeping the long game in your sights and acting accordingly or interacting accordingly with any journalists.
Yeah, definitely. And also it's always nice to just be friends with interesting people. I mean, that's from my journalism days. I can tell you that a bunch of the PR guys, that's how I met them and became friends with them, and ultimately ended up in PR.
All right.
It was just because of becoming friends with them. But you mentioned something about don't follow up so much that it turns into harassment essentially. And so I wanted to kind of go to the next slide here. The life of a pitch and what happens once that pitch lands inside of your inbox. What's going on there? So, we have a barometer, Propel puts out a barometer every quarter about just like the state of pitching. That we get these numbers from anonymously aggregating and analyzing about 300 to 400 in some months, or sorry, some quarters, even 500,000 pitches. And that's how we get a lot of our data. And so this is some data that we found from the Q3 of 2022. We found that, first of all, 55.92% of all pitches are open within the first hour of receiving them. 58.66% of all pitches happen within 4 hours. Pitch responses happen within 4 hours. And then 51.01% of stories that are pitched are published within 3 days. So that's just the data that we're seeing. And that's what we see as PR people. What I want to know is a pitch lands in your inbox or it lands in a reporter's inbox. What happens? What's its life look like after that point?
So as someone who gets like hundreds, if not thousands of emails in a day, I would say the most effective ones are tied to like someone offering up someone who can give commentary on something that is happening or breaking right at that moment. So I think I mentioned at the early part of the conversation that watch the news cycle. That's one of the main reasons why. Okay, so if you have a crypto expert or someone who was very close to SBF or something of that nature, something exclusive and something legitimately. And again, and I say this, one of these things like I'll keep coming back to this idea of being realistic and being sort of truth in advertisement, completely honest, completely transparent. Don't oversell something. Because if you oversell it and I open it and I respond and I find out that it's not what it was billed as, I'm going to be very upset and I'm probably not going to deal with you anymore. So the key here is being straight up honest, making it interesting without embellishing. But what I open is something that's tied to the news, the immediate news of the day. And so for me, today's news is dominated by the FTX saga, the Federal Reserve decision. I actually got an email from Columbia was pitching some expert voices on the legal issues surrounding SBF. So I forwarded that onto the team because everyone on my team at this point is working on that particular story to some form of degree. But things that are explicitly tied to a big story, that's kind of your chance. Like you should see something if you've got, in the case of SBF for crypto, when you've got someone in your Rolodex that can speak to that issue, that's the best time to sort of pounce.
Right. No, I totally hear you 100%. I think the question that I was asking is more, like, what is the process of turning that pitch into a story? So it lands in your inbox. You mentioned that you send it out. That's something that I would do.
Yeah.
Let's say it goes, and then if you could also enlighten us a little bit on what happens from the journalist side. A journalist gets the pitch, they really like it. What happens?
So if they really like it, it's like, okay, I'm going to use this. Like I sort of mentioned the 3 buckets. I think that's, generally speaking, that's kind of like how a lot of journalists operate. Like, okay, wow, like this is good. Like I'm going to call this person today. I emailed just this week. I was working on a story related to small business. I called someone that I've been dealing with. She's an expert voice. And she gave me 2 quotes, one that I used for my story and one that I passed along to a colleague who's working on something different or related. And she was like, wow, this is a great quote. I'm going to use this tomorrow. So I think also one of the most effective pitches that I think PR folks have gotten very sophisticated and have been very useful to me and other journalists is like using a quote. Like you see all of this craziness happening in the headlines, and if it's related and you have someone who can speak to it, like include a quote, just a cut and paste sort of like, so-and-so CEO of Acme Consulting says, wow, SBF is in a hell of a lot of trouble. Wow, he really needs to find himself a good lawyer. Here are kind of like the 3 issues. Doesn't have to be a big blocky quote, but a really pithy 2 or 3 sentence summary of like very colorful, very punchy, like just give it to him straight. Like that will get my attention. That will get any journalist's attention. Everybody, we're all kind of looking for quotes, and we all need someone's, a voice, an authoritative voice to strengthen our reporting.
Yes, I mean, and that's also something really interesting. A lot of people want to have that interview. They want to have the sit down 30 minutes, let's go. But with the way that the news cycle is running, especially this past 6 months, you don't have time for that. So, and that ultimately what you are trying to do is get a quote. So why not just send it straight out, but have a little bit of that meat surrounding it, explaining who the person is, explaining why they think this, and explaining, why the journalist or the editor should take their quote seriously and include them in the story. I think that's a really fantastic news strategy, or not news strategy, but a really fantastic strategy that saves time on both ends, to be honest.
Exactly.
So so following up with this kind of, let's say instead of sending over a quote, an interview happens, or it be it an email interview, a regular interview. Let's say someone accepted a press release, asked some follow-up questions, and said, okay, awesome. And then nothing happens. And then you just hear radio silence. And sometimes it doesn't get published. Yeah. Sometimes whoever you were in contact with just kind of go silent on you. What's happening is, sometimes, or what's happening on their end. There's a whole nother story behind the computer we're not seeing. So I'd love to be able to hear what's happening on your end and why sometimes certain stories either might get killed by an editor or just never go up.
I think the biggest thing is the journalist's most precious commodity is time. And I can talk to you today and say, this is a great story. I really want to write it. And then tomorrow all hell breaks loose. Like let's say theoretically Binance, which is the biggest name in crypto at this point, goes under. Like the CEO gets arrested. Like all of a sudden, all of the best laid plans and all this great evergreen type, stories that I wanted to cover and that I had every inclination or every aspiration to cover, it's all going in the garbage can because now I have to turn my attention to the biggest story of the day. And it is not your client. And sadly, that's just kind of like how it works. A story gets killed only if I think a story will only get killed only if we discover like, okay, we do the fact checking and it's not above board. Maybe the person involved has been kind of like accused of a crime. Sometimes it gets messy. And so you try as best as you can to not amplify a voice that's been implicated in something that, like, come back and reflect poorly on the organization or the reporter. I think it's only in an extreme circumstance that the story would get killed. But I think that based on, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's like you spoke to a reporter, it looks promising, but then all of a sudden they kind of go into radio silence. And the radio silence, I think most times can be explained by they got swept up in a bigger story, and then all of a sudden, like, all of their plans that they had to write this particular story just changed because they just didn't have the time to do it. And then it's like, okay, I got to catch my breath. And I've been in this predicament more times than I can count.
Oh yeah, me too.
Like I say, I try. I endeavor to, respond and say, oh, look, this whole SBS thing, like, it's blown up. Like, I can't even think about anything else right now. This is still on my radar, but I need to just get like I'll circle back with you like in a week or so. I need to like deal with this because this is all I'm eating, breathing, and sleeping this particular story right now. And it's just the way it is.
A lot of times that's all we want as PR people. We just want, where's if something's not going up, if something's happening, we would love if the journalist just says, hey, I'm not going to be able to do it this week. Maybe next week, remind me, I'll circle back. And that's and that kind of points to an even bigger trend that we've been seeing, which is that our research is showing that only 3.35% of pitches are receiving any kind of response. Any, not even a no thanks, not a don't ever talk to me again. Period. That's so you're looking at almost 97% where nobody's saying anything. So why? What do you think? So first of all, I think a lot of us would like to know. Let's say that this does happen and the reporter kind of just goes radio silent. What would be a good strategy to kind of follow up with this reporter? Because you could usually tell, like, oh, this person is like now writing all about the FTX scandal, so obviously they're a little bit busy. What's a good way to follow up with them? Or if you're not really sure what they're doing, what would be a good way that's not annoying and not pushy, but saying, hey, I'm still here.
Yeah. I'd say follow up, like 2 emails or so are plenty. If you have a strong relationship or a long relationship with a particular journalist, I think a text message is fine. Like in the middle of the day, I don't like getting phone calls because I'm always in and out of meetings and I'm on deadline and I'm covering things and I'm not going to answer. A follow-up text message if you have that journalist.
A text message.
Yeah, a text message. Yeah, I have a number of PR folks that have been working for a long time.
Okay.
I have one who is, maybe I shouldn't say this publicly, but she can be very, very pushy. So I tend to like, okay, I like this, but like I can't deal with this now. But then she'll like can continuously push, like, don't be that person, don't be that guy, or don't be that gal, please. And super, like, I've literally known her for like almost 20 years, but she can be like really intense. And that for me personally is a turn off. And most journalists, like, we're not going to respond and we'll actually just ignore you just on general purposes if you're going to be like really, really pushy. Don't be pushy. Be insistent. Don't be pushy. I would say that a couple of follow-up emails is fine, depending on your relationship or your closest. A text message like, hey, where are we on this, that, and the other thing? I literally had this happen just a day ago, like someone that I've worked with a couple of times on a couple of stories from Goldman Sachs followed up with me on text because they didn't get they emailed me, but I didn't respond right away, and my emails were kind of stacking up. But I'm pretty good at zero inboxing on a daily basis. So I do try and check and make sure that I haven't missed anything. But on this particular instance, because I was traveling, she didn't hear from me. She messaged me. I said, like, basically what I said, like, we're eating, breathing, and sleeping the FTX story today. I can't deal with this, but it is something that I do think will work. And we're actually kind of in our internal planning process, we're looking to like, okay, get sort of evergreen stuff lined up for the holidays when things will be slow and everybody's going on vacation and we can just like dole it out. So I did sort of not promise her, but say, this is on my radar because this is kind of evergreen and I can pull the trigger on this when I have a little bit more time next week or so, or at, maybe sometime on the weekend. But I did, respond. And there are certain, there's almost a hierarchy of people. Like, Goldman Sachs, like I'm always going to respond to Goldman
Yeah.
Sachs. Like, I mean, I'm not going to lie. You know, Acme Financial, probably not. The PR person from Acme Financial will more than likely not have my phone number. But I will, if it's an interesting enough story, I will absolutely endeavor to make sure that like I am working on this and this is on my radar, but like I'm just too consumed with other things to deal with this right now.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. No, I totally hear you. That was that was something that also happened, to me as well. And you do feel bad about it. You feel bad that the journalists, they wrote this entire story, that they worked hard on it, that they used their own time to, to get a story out, and all of a sudden a major news segment or a major news story is dropping. And something that they could have been spending a week on, all of a sudden is, it can't be used just because so much other stuff is happening. I can personally tell you that we had someone go out to a dangerous area of the country to interview someone who was who to interview someone interesting, let's put it that way. And this was going to be a major story. This was going to be something, a really big way to get a voice that's typically not heard out there. We had an exclusive on it. And then unfortunately, the day before it was set to go up, our former president, Shimon Peres, died, and you had 55 world leaders coming. So, sometimes the world keeps spinning. And unfortunately, as a journalist, you can't put up everything just because something unfortunately bigger happens. But I think that's great what you said, Javier, that you always try to say, hey, or at least as much as you possibly can, you say, hey, I'm swamped right now. I will get to this. This is something I'm interested in, and we'll get to it as soon as possible. But I think that's something that a lot of us would like to hear more of from journalists. So I do have another, quick question. So my personal PR horror story, because I think that it's important to say at least one horror story, just so that we know what not to do. It comes sort of like what you were talking about. And that is, I got a pitch and I had no follow-ups. Within a couple of hours, somebody was calling my cell phone asking me when the story is going to come up. Now, that's a great way to get blocked by any journalist. And so I was wondering, if you had, something similar where you're just like, absolutely not, this is going to stick in my head forever. And if you do this, you're out.
Yeah. So as I said, like, the pushiness, that there is a temptation to be pushy because you want to see the story and you want to like go back to your client and say, oh, wait, you're in the Wall Street Journal or whatever, or Axios. Yeah, sometimes it's literally about like the news cycle. It's unpredictable. The story they may have had every intention to run the story on a certain day, but like the news cycle knocked it off, and like, okay, this story, and because I was a weekend editor, I kind of know this a lot. I was like, it was a busy week, so there's too much noise going on, and I want this story, I like this story, and I want to make certain that as many people see it as possible. So I'm going to hold it because there's just way too much going on now, and no one is paying attention to it. And when the dust settles on whatever is happening this week or today, I'm going to run the story. It's just literally about it being held because no one is going to be paying attention when, the world is on fire. So we'll, and then again, in that instance, I will make every good faith effort to manage the expectations of the PR person. Like, this is getting held for a couple of days just because there's other stuff going on. I think that's a good practice, even, admittedly for reporters. Like, if you promise them that it's going to run and you've talked to them, or, that the stories and it gets held, then just email them like, look, it's getting held for a couple of days. Like, just do that. It doesn't take but a couple of seconds to write an email to say this is being held. And sometimes it's, if you see, like, I keep referring to SBF and FTX, but if you see that the news cycle is busy, probably in your mind say this is being held because all hell is breaking loose and no one is going to be thinking about this. So you may even hold off on sending an email right away or following up right away. But when you do, just say, hey, I see, like, I know it's kind of crazy, but just give me a sense. If it's been held, that's fine, but just let me know.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's not only a great way to, just show that you understand what they're going through. But I know that when I was working in journal, like when I was a senior editor and someone said, "Hey, I know that you're a little busy," I was more likely to go back to them just because it's like, "Oh, you're not pushy, you're not being crazy, and you're not really being obnoxious." So I just wanted to switch gears really quickly and talk about the changing media landscape and talk about it from your perspective. So specifically, we're seeing a lot of cuts and consolidation in mainstream media. So we talked about at the top that Axios is getting into a lot more of the local news, especially because if you look at this, what happened this year, Gannett, the largest owner of U.S. newspapers, laid off 800 staff members across the United States, which is obviously perfect for Axios to come in and start to be that voice so that there's no news deserts, which is a huge issue right now in the United States. BBC got rid of 10% of its staff. Protocol shut down. So many mergers and acquisitions, so many shutdowns, so many layoffs. And, I was wondering, given that you are you are quite high up in Axios, what does that look like from your perspective? What are you seeing, and how do you feel that it's affecting journalism as a whole?
Yeah, we're fortunate in that we are still very much on a growth path. We are laser focused on expanding the local franchise. We're expanding our national team early next year, so those plans have not changed. But there are discussions, because we are focused on what we perceive to be our priorities. There's, just this week, we were talking a little bit more about where to cut the fat and where we're spending a little bit too much, and like getting our marching orders from the top about, these are things or line item expenses that we have to be a lot more careful about. So we're feeling it too, and certainly not to the degree that we're laying people off, and there are no layoffs in our immediate future, and we have gotten certain assurances that that's not at all what is happening. It's quite the opposite. And we would probably be in a different place if we had not gotten this investment from Cox, and they are very committed to us running the business as we see fit. And the vision, as we saw it earlier this year when we first announced this deal, when our founders announced it, it's still very much intact. But it's just a really difficult time. We went, I think, immediately after lockdowns ended, it seemed as if there was just a huge expansion. Everybody was building up. So there was an perhaps maybe, at the risk of sounding insensitive, maybe an overinvestment. Everybody was hiring. Everyone was jumping ship from one organization to join another one. It was just sort of like, the YOLO economy. Like everybody was just quitting and going somewhere else. So in a lot of ways, there's been a correction to that. Like we're seeing a lot of that retrenchment in the tech sector. And in a lot of ways, we're an extension of that. Like we are tech because we rely heavily on ad dollars. Like every digital platform has a revenue model that's based on getting advertisers to pay you money so that when a visitor visits your site, you can see ads. So we're feeling that just like any other digital platform. We are at least fortunate to have had this major investment earlier this year that has put us in a lot more of a steady place, and we're committed to continuing our growth. But at the same time, we are not immune to the forces that are walloping the economy and certainly walloping others in the industry. So these are the things I think they happen in cycles, and we've been here before. I think like in the early 2000s, there was a lot of hand wringing about layoffs in journalism. What do we do? What, et cetera. And the industry adapted. So there, at that point, you gave growth to a lot of subscription models. People got smarter about advertising and digital growth, and being able to say, we draw a lot of eyeballs to our site on a weekly or monthly basis. We should be able to charge a premium for that. Here's like, who's doing the clicking, like, high earners, college degree, et cetera, et cetera. Our business became a lot more fused with marketing, because the reality of this is people, if you're going to give news away for free, you better have a very robust advertising model. And if you're not, then you probably are going to have to experiment with a paywall. So.
Interesting. So I mean, that's unfortunately, that we are starting to see a lot more experimenting with paywalls. We're starting to see a lot more of what used to be free content, being paid. And I think that's leading a lot of people to move towards new media. New media has its its own positives and negatives. But something happened a couple of weeks, it was last week really, that I think is quite interesting. And I'm going to make this as apolitical as possible because I want us to keep talking only about the industry. So I'm just going to launch into the question. So when Elon Musk began releasing documents about the Hunter Biden laptop story, he gave it all to Matt Taibbi, who published what was essentially an article, but it was really a Twitter thread. Now, I was listening to the Wall Street Journal's podcast about this, the Potomac Watch podcast, and Kim Strassel said something which I found to be really interesting. She said that the reason most of the media is ignoring this story is, quote, because the media can't confirm the arguments Taibbi was making because the underlying documents aren't always there. So taking into consideration that more people than ever are getting their news from influencers, podcasters, social media, are you getting the impression that the average news consumer actually cares if a breaking news story is published on Twitter and not, a major publication?
I feel like this, the new era, like of Substack, of Twitter, of podcasts, it's an opportunity first and foremost for PR professionals, because it's not just about landing on the Wall Street Journal anymore. You can get your guy on a podcast to talk about their product or the overall state of the economy, et cetera. You can feed a story to Matt Taibbi on Substack, or Barry Weiss, or there are a lot of Substackers who are very, very influential. Not all Substackers are created equal. But I do firmly believe that if you can get someone with a very large following to publish something about whatever it is that you're trying to promote, that is absolutely a win.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's also interesting, looking at how are the big players such as Axios, who, as Kim Strassel says, can confer, if they were to publish something, it's usually because they have the underlying documents, so that other journalists can look and see, oh, this is true, this is what's happening, versus where you might have some influencer who is kind of giving their view of things, which might not be as informed. So I think it's going to be interesting in the next few years to see how that shapes the media landscape and the news landscape and just, the general knowledge of what's going on in the world.
Right. And I think, look, if you're leaking something, you have an agenda. And if you have an agenda, it is more than likely you want to leak that information to someone who you feel shares your agenda. And that carries benefits, but there are also certain risks that people are dismissive, because it's oh, so-and-so, this left-wing blogger, or this right-wing blogger, or however you want to characterize it, the story ends up getting tainted or overtaken by the personalities involved. And then the issues at the core end up being subsumed by, more partisan bickering, more polarization, and people that don't kind of miss the forest for the trees, or will absolutely throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. And I really hope that doesn't happen in in the new media landscape of 2023. It's a tough media landscape to be in right now as it is, and just the more partisanship, the worse it's going to be. So, but you know what, we're here today. We're talking about media. We're talking about how important it is, and how both of us as PR people and journalists can really understand each other more, and that's half the battle, and something that we should all do just in general, not just PR journalists, but anyone else. Always try to see the other person's point of view, and in getting with the other person's point of view, we do have some questions from the audience. So the first question is about distribution services. This person has used news distribution services for press releases, and they could generate a report on placement to the newspaper's website. Is that the end process? How does someone know if they're on PR Newswire or something like that, if people are actually reading?
Mm.
if you have any
Yeah,
information on that.
yeah. I mean, I when I was at CNBC, we used to aggregate a lot of press releases. There is a obvious difference, I think, between a story that is actually reported out and something that gets picked up by a press release on a website. So I think that PR people should be careful about trying to merchandise that as some sort of a placement per se, because it's the reporter didn't actually touch it. They didn't talk to you. They didn't pull the quote. They didn't include it in some sort of a story. I think there are very obvious differences between a press release and an actual reported story. And kind of like referring back to what I said earlier in the conversation about kind of truth in advertising and not overselling or embellishing something. That's one of those things that if you didn't talk to a reporter did not include a story, you include something of whatever it was that you were pitching in the story, then it's not really a placement, I think.
Fair. I hear you on that one, but yeah, definitely that's an interesting take. So I'm going to move on to the next question. Is reaching out to a general newsroom email effective, or is it generally ignored because nobody is really addressed in the general newsroom email? And if so, who's actually seeing the pitch?
I mean, it can be kind of annoying because everyone's getting a pitch. But if I am a reporter on the beat and I am covering something, or like I'm writing about something that day and the pitch resonates, or it is someone who I think could be a strong voice authoritatively for my story, then I'll reach out. So I would don't be so quick to dismiss the newsroom thing because everyone will see it. It's just sort of a matter of who will respond, and it's dicey. But I would say, if you don't have any other port of call, do it that way, and do endeavor as best as you can to get to somebody directly.
It sounds almost like when there's an emergency, you're supposed to point at someone and say, you call 911, as opposed to yelling, somebody call 911. So this is, the general is, hey, somebody take this. Someone might, but you're more likely going to get better results if you point at them and say, hey, this is for you.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So our next question, I think we have time for two more. Now, this is a really interesting one for me. What do you feel are some of the implications for PR firms of Axios moving into these smaller local markets?
It's a good one because local reporters, I think they have less tunnel vision than we do at the national level. There are just certain things that catch as a national reporter or someone who's worked, for a global news service, CNBC, Reuters, Journal, etc. There are certain things that are specific to a market, like a local market, that I wouldn't necessarily think are newsworthy, but a local reporter would absolutely be like, okay, like Southwest Arkansas, anything to do with Walmart, because they're a giant, but there are also very local implications for the things that they do. They're doing hosting like a job fair that weekend. I wouldn't write about the Walmart job fair, but the reporter who is focused on their niche of Arkansas absolutely would. And so the local is opening up. We found this is why we're investing so much in it. There's just a wealth. It went from being a kind of like proving ground for young reporters ages ago, and then people started cutting back because it was like, okay, we don't have the resources. But that left a void. So there are a lot of things that happen at the local level that arguably deserve more attention, but they're not getting it because the resources haven't been there. So I think my own belief is that the local opens up a wealth of opportunity for PR folks such as yourself, and certainly if your client is smaller, you're probably more likely to get some sort of hit with the local reporter than you would with someone covering crypto or capital markets, etc.
Yeah, and I think that, just as someone who comes from a smaller city, I come from Indianapolis originally, and I can see that the number of reporters there is dwindling. You go to rural America, it's also dwindling. You're having news deserts, and when you don't have a news a reporter, you could look at it on the local political level, the economic level. If you don't have a reporter looking into stories, keeping people accountable, a lot of corruption tends to happen. Quality of life goes down. So I tend to agree with you that I think this initiative is going to be great, and I think it's going to be not only just for PR people who are trying to get into like a certain rural market or whatever, but for the people that these Axios reporters, local reporters, will be serving. I think it's going to be extraordinarily important and impactful for what they're doing. So I know I said that we had time for 2 questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Javier, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your thoughts on everything. This was extremely informative. And again, we really appreciate you coming on.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me, and I hope it was helpful.
Oh, 100%. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining as well. Bye, everyone, and have happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Take care.